I didn't say a word when my mother-in-law slapped her hand on the table and told me to sign over my condo. I just looked at my husband, and he looked away. That was the moment I knew exactly what I had to do. But let me back up, because this story didn't start at that dinner table. It started 6 years ago, in a tiny studio apartment that smelled like old carpet and ambition, when I was 24 years old and saving every single dollar I made as a paralegal to buy something that was entirely, irreversibly mine. I grew up watching my mom struggle. My dad left when I was 11, and from that point forward, I watched her negotiate with landlords, borrow from relatives, and apologize for existing in spaces that weren't hers. I told myself early on that I would never be in that position. I would own something. I would have a foundation that nobody could pull out from under me. That idea became almost an obsession, in the healthiest way I knew how to be obsessed. I clipped coupons. I took on extra work. I skipped vacations and drove a car that I was mildly embarrassed about, and wore the same winter coat for 4 years because it still kept me warm, and that was enough. By 26, I had saved enough for a down payment on a one-bedroom condo in a mid-sized city where the market was reasonable, and the neighborhood was up and coming in a way that felt calculated rather than just hopeful. I worked with a real estate attorney, a habit I developed because I'd spent enough time in legal offices to know that paperwork done right at the beginning saves catastrophic grief later, and I purchased that condo. Under an LLC I had formed specifically for that purpose. My attorney suggested it for liability protection, and I agreed immediately. At the time, it felt like a technicality. Later, it felt like the smartest thing I had ever done. I didn't tell anyone except my mom. Not my friends, not my coworkers. I had learned from watching other women in my life that the moment you tell people you own something, they begin to feel entitled to it. So, I kept quiet. I moved in. I painted the walls a shade of green that made me unreasonably happy, and I built a small, steady, private life. Then I met my husband. I want to be careful here, because he is not the villain of this story. Not exactly. He is more like a man who was raised in a particular way, and never once questioned whether that way was correct. His family was large and loud and close in a way that looked like love from the outside but functioned more like a surveillance system. His mother, who I will call my mother-in-law because that is what she was and titles matter, was the center of gravity around which everyone orbited. His father deferred to her on everything. His younger brother, who I'll call my brother-in-law, was treated like a crown prince who had simply not yet found his kingdom. And my husband was the responsible one, the steady one, the one expected to hold things together when holding things together was required. We dated for 2 years before we got engaged. In that time, I noticed things I chose to interpret generously. The way my mother-in-law asked questions that were really instructions. The way holiday plans were not discussed but announced. The way my husband's independence evaporated slightly whenever he was in her presence, like a plant that had been trained to grow toward a specific light source and couldn't quite find another direction. I told myself these were normal family dynamics. I told myself I was being too critical. I told myself a lot of things that were only partially true. Before we got married, I sat down with my husband and I told him about the condo. I explained the LLC, the structure, the reason I had done it that way. I was transparent. I wanted him to understand that I had built something before him and that I intended to keep it, not as a secret weapon, but as a foundation. He said he thought it was smart. He said he was proud of me. He said his name wasn't on it, and that was fine because I had built it myself. What he did not say, though I only understood this much later, was that he had mentioned it to his mother. We got married. We rented a house together in a different part of the city, something larger, something that fit 2 people. And I kept my condo as a rental property. I found a tenant, charged fair market rent, and the income quietly supplemented our household budget in ways I never made a production of. My husband knew. His family did not. Or so I believed. The first year of marriage was mostly good. The second year was when my brother-in-law decided he wanted to start a business. I want to be fair about this too. The idea itself was not terrible. He wanted to open a specialty food shop, the kind of place that sells artisan ingredients and hosts small cooking classes. His enthusiasm was genuine. His research, however, was minimal, and his execution was chaotic from the very beginning. He signed a lease on a commercial space before he had finished writing a business plan. He ordered inventory before he had confirmed his supplier contracts. He hired 2 employees before he had opened the doors. My husband's family, who were not wealthy but were comfortable, rallied around him immediately. My mother-in-law organized a family dinner to celebrate and called it an investment opportunity. Everyone contributed. My father-in-law wrote a check. My husband wrote a check from our joint account, which he mentioned to me after the fact as though it were a minor detail. I said nothing at that dinner. I smiled and passed the bread and watched my brother-in-law talk about his vision with the confidence of someone who had never been told that confidence alone does not pay a commercial lease. 11 months later, the shop closed. The debt was significant. Not catastrophic in the way that ruins lives permanently, but heavy enough to cause real strain. My brother-in-law was embarrassed, and then, as embarrassment often does when left unaddressed, that embarrassment curdled into something defensive and resentful. He started suggesting, first quietly and then less quietly, that the family needed to do something to help him recover. That recovery was a group responsibility. That this was what family was for. My mother-in-law agreed loudly and often. The conversations began happening without me. I know this because my husband would come home from family dinners I hadn't attended, and he would be quieter than usual. A little distant, like a man who had been told something he hadn't decided how to deliver yet. I asked him several times what was being discussed. He said it was nothing. He said his family was just trying to figure things out. He said I shouldn't worry. Then came the Sunday dinner that changed everything. It was late autumn, the kind of evening where the light goes amber early and everyone sits around the table a little longer than they need to because the alternative is going back out into the cold. My mother-in-law had made a large meal, and there was wine, and it felt almost warm and normal until she set down her fork, folded her hands, and looked directly at me. She said that the family had been discussing options. She said that my brother-in-law needed a fresh start, and that fresh starts required resources. She said that it had come to her attention that I had a property, a condo, that I was renting out, that was sitting there generating income. And she said, with the steady calm of someone who had rehearsed this, that she thought it was time for me to sell it and put the proceeds toward helping the family get back on its feet. The table was very quiet. I looked at my husband. He was looking at his plate. I looked at my father-in-law. He gave me a very small, slightly apologetic nod, which I understood to mean he agreed with her but would rather not be the one saying it out loud. I looked back at my mother-in-law and I said, very evenly, that I appreciated her sharing that and that I would think about it. She seemed satisfied with that. She picked her fork back up. The conversation moved on. My husband did not look at me for the rest of the meal. On the drive home, I asked him how long those discussions had been happening. He said a few weeks. I asked him why he hadn't told me. He said he didn't want me to get upset before there was something concrete to discuss. I told him that his family discussing the disposal of my personal assets was, by definition, something concrete. He said he knew. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know what to do. I told him I understood. And I did understand in a way that made me deeply, quietly sad. He had been trained his entire life to smooth things over, to defer, to find a way to make the problem go away without anyone having to change or be held accountable. I was now the problem, and he didn't know how to not try to make me go away. I did not sleep well that night. But by morning, I was very clear. I called my attorney the following day. I explained the situation. She confirmed what I already suspected, that my condo, held under an LLC in my name alone, was entirely protected. My husband had no claim to it, particularly given our prenuptial agreement, which we had signed at my insistence and which he had agreed to without complaint. The property was mine. No one could compel me to sell it. But I had also learned something important from that Sunday dinner. This was not going to be a one-time conversation. My mother-in-law had made a decision, and she was not someone who unmade her decisions. The pressure would continue. It would escalate. And my husband, bless him, was not equipped to stop it. So I began to think strategically. My tenant at the condo had given me notice 2 months prior that she would be leaving at the end of the year. I had been planning to find a new tenant, but I had also, in a quiet back corner of my mind, been considering something else. The building my condo was in had a second unit on the same floor that had come up for sale. I had looked at it more out of curiosity than intention, but now I looked at it with purpose. I bought the second unit 2 weeks after that dinner, under the same LLC, cash, from savings and a small loan I had arranged independently. I told no one. In the meantime, the pressure campaign continued exactly as I had expected. My mother-in-law called me twice to follow up on my thinking. She framed it differently each time, once as a practical financial analysis, once as an emotional appeal about family loyalty. My brother-in-law sent my husband a long message about how he just needed one real break and he knew the family would come through. My father-in-law mentioned offhandedly during a visit that a good investment property was one that benefited everyone, not just the owner. My husband relayed all of these to me with the exhausted expression of a man caught between two weather systems. I listened. I nodded. I said I was still thinking. What I did not say was that I had already called a property manager about both units. That I had already had conversations with a contractor about minor renovations that would allow me to rent the second unit furnished at a premium. That I had already spoken to my attorney about the full scope of what I was building. What I also did not say was that I had begun looking into my brother-in-law's actual financial situation, not out of cruelty, but because I believed in understanding the full picture before making any decision. What I found was illuminating. His debts were real but not insurmountable. He had been approved for a small business recovery loan through a local program, but had not followed through on the application because, from what I could piece together, completing the application required acknowledging specific mistakes he had made, and he was not yet ready to do that. The money the family wanted me to provide would not have solved the underlying problem. It would have delayed a reckoning that needed to happen. I did not share this information with anyone. Not yet. 3 months after that first dinner, my mother-in-law organized what she called a family meeting. She invited everyone. She sent a formal agenda via group text, which I found impressive in its audacity. The agenda listed, as item 3 of 4, a discussion of the family property contribution plan. We sat in her living room on a Sunday afternoon. My brother-in-law was there, looking slightly sheepish and slightly entitled, which is a difficult combination to achieve, but he managed it. My father-in-law sat in his armchair. My husband sat beside me on the couch and held my hand, which I believe was genuine and also strategic. My mother-in-law opened by talking about the importance of family. She talked about how they had always come through for each other and always would. She talked about what it meant to be part of something larger than yourself. It was a genuinely good speech. Then she pivoted. She said she had done some research. She said the condo was worth a meaningful amount given current market conditions. She said that if I sold it and contributed the proceeds, the family could resolve my brother-in-law's debt entirely and have something left over for him to restart more carefully this time. She said she knew it was a sacrifice, but that family was built on sacrifice. She looked at me with an expression that was equal parts warmth and absolute expectation. Everyone in that room looked at me. I looked at my husband. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, something close to hope, but edged with apology. I took a breath. I said that I had done a lot of thinking, that I understood the situation, and I understood what the family was asking, that I wanted to be transparent with everyone. And then I said, calmly and without drama, that the condo was not available to be sold, because it was not solely my decision to make it was a business asset held under an LLC with specific obligations, and that I had, in fact, recently expanded that business by acquiring a second unit in the same building. The room was very still. My mother-in-law said, quietly, that she didn't understand. I said I was happy to explain. I said that the property had been a business from the beginning, structured legally as such. I said I had taken on additional investment in the property, which meant I had financial obligations to my own business that I could not simply dissolve. And then, because I had decided that this was the moment for full transparency, I said that I had also done some research of my own. I slid a printed copy of the Small Business Recovery Loan Program information across the coffee table toward my brother-in-law. I said that he had been pre-approved for a loan that would cover approximately 70% of his outstanding debt, and that the application process, while requiring some detailed disclosure, was entirely manageable with a little help. My brother-in-law picked up the paper and looked at it. He said nothing. My mother-in-law said that this wasn't what she had asked for. I said I understood. I said I was offering what I could actually provide, which was research and information and genuine support, rather than an asset I had built over 6 years and which was not mine to give away. She said that I was being selfish. And here is where I want to be precise about what happened in me in that moment, because it is important. I did not feel angry. I had expected this word. I had sat with this word for months, turning it over, examining whether it fit. Was I being selfish? I had considered it seriously. I had asked myself hard questions. And what I had concluded was that protecting something you built is not the same as taking something from someone else. My brother-in-law's debt did not originate with me. His choices did not belong to me. My obligation to him was goodwill and support and honest information. It was not my condo. I said, still calmly, that I disagreed with that characterization. My mother-in-law said that if this was how I felt about this family, then perhaps my husband and I needed to have a serious conversation about what I was actually committed to. My husband, to his very great credit, spoke for the first time in that meeting. He said that I had been more than fair. He said that he had thought about this a great deal and that he could not ask me to surrender an asset I had built before we were together. He said he loved his family, and he also knew that this was not a reasonable request. The silence after that was the loudest thing I had heard in years. We left shortly after. The drive home was quiet in a different way than the drive home from that first dinner. Less troubled. More settled. The weeks that followed were tense. My mother-in-law did not call me. She called my husband. Frequently. He handled it, imperfectly but genuinely. My brother-in-law submitted the loan application. I know because my husband told me, with something that sounded like relief. My father-in-law sent me a brief, awkward text message saying he appreciated my patience and that he hoped we could move past this. I thanked him and told him I hoped the same. The loan was approved 6 weeks later. My brother-in-law used it. He did not open another shop. He took a position managing inventory for a local grocery chain and, from what I understand, he is good at it. He had more aptitude for the operational side of things than the visionary side, which was useful to know and less painful to discover at someone else's expense. It was not the story my mother-in-law wanted. She wanted a grand gesture. She wanted sacrifice, as proof of belonging. What she got instead was a daughter-in-law who understood that the most loving thing I could do for her son was to remain a stable, financially independent person who did not disappear her assets because of pressure. My condo is still mine. Both of them. The renovation on the second unit finished 4 months ago, and I have a wonderful tenant who works from home and takes very good care of the space. The LLC now owns 2 properties and the income is steady and real and mine. My husband and I are still married. We are, in fact, closer than we were before all of this, which is not the outcome I would have predicted from inside the worst moments of those months. There was a conversation we had about 2 weeks after the family meeting. A long, honest, difficult conversation where he told me things about his childhood that helped me understand the gravity he had grown up inside. And I told him things about my childhood and about what it had cost my mother to have nothing in her own name. We cried a little. It was not comfortable, but it was true. And truth, I have learned, is a better foundation than comfort. My mother-in-law and I have a relationship now that I would describe as respectful and cool. She is gracious at family events. I am genuinely pleasant in return. We have both accepted, without stating it explicitly, that I am not the woman she thought she was getting when her son married me. She wanted someone orbitable. She got someone with her own gravity. I think about my mom a lot when I walk through those condos. The green walls in the first one are still there, a little scuffed now from the tenant before last, but still the same shade that made me happy the day I painted them. I think about her negotiating with landlords. I think about the apologies. I think about what it cost her to not have a foundation and how that cost passed down to me as a kind of hunger that I turned, I hope, into something useful. I am 31 years old. I own 2 properties. I have a husband who, when it counted, found the courage to stand next to me. I have an LLC and an attorney I trust and a savings account that I add to every month without fail. Nobody asked me what I wanted when they planned that family meeting. Nobody considered that I might have built something specifically so that no meeting like that could end with me having nothing. They thought I was the quiet one, the accommodating one, the one who would figure it out because I always figured it out. They were right about one thing. I always figure it out. And I had already figured it out before anyone sat down at that table. The foundation holds. It was built to